Okay, good evening. I'm Metta Spencer. I'm in Toronto, and I'm here with two new friends. Um, One of whose cell phone is playing music at me already. I don't know where that came from. Okay, so we're off for a very interesting conversation with our American neighbors um, because we have, in just a few months ago, we had a conference here in Toronto of an organization called World Beyond War, which is an American based organization that I had heard about, but I hadn't really been very familiar with yet. And they had a wonderful conference here, brought people that I have a whole list of people to get acquainted with soon, people that they brought as speakers. And since I am a dual citizen of the US and Canada, I always look for ways in which I could use my interests in peace work to kind of put one foot in each side of the border. There is really a border here. I mean, there really is a border between the US and Canada, and you really know it. I think especially if you live in Canada, because you don't interact that much with groups in the US, rather to my disappointment. So every time I get a chance to look for ways of making a closer relationship with American peace activists, I like to do that. And this is what we're going to do tonight. Get acquainted a little bit with two peace activists in the US. Number one, we have David Swanson. Say hello, David, so your face will pop up on the screen.
Hi, here I am.
There's David. David, I guess you're in Virginia, are you?
I am, yes.
Very good. Okay, and David Swanson is the founder, or at least he says the co-founder of World Beyond War. And he did it by writing a book, which we will get to in a minute. And then we have here Greta Zarro. Say hi, Greta.
Thanks for inviting us, Metta.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Greta Zarro, I just found out, she works part-time for World Beyond War, and she works the other part-time as an organic farmer in upstate New York, someplace near Cooperstown, is that right? Which I can't say I know where Cooperstown is, but I'm glad to know that she's an organic farmer, because we can go back and have another conversation about vegetables and carbon in the soil and things like that. So that's very important to me nowadays. Anyway, so both of these people have been devoting their lives lately to promoting an organization called World Beyond War. And I want to get acquainted with that organization, because it turns out it is one of the major outfits, I presume. I don't know whether you're the biggest outfit peace group in the US now or not. David, what do you think? Who's the biggest peace organization in the US today?
Well, certainly not in terms of budget, probably not in terms of claims of membership, although we have people working with us or signing our Declaration of Peace and committing to work with us in 175 countries. And we have absolutely no intention of being a US peace group or a US anything, but of being globally directed by staff and volunteers that eventually will reflect the population of the globe, not of this little 4% of humanity in the US. So we started with nothing 4 years ago, and now have 3 half-time staff and hope to grow rapidly from there. But I wouldn't say we're the biggest anything yet.
All right. Well, at any rate, you're certainly making waves. If you've got chapters in 170 countries, you're doing fine.
Well, not chapters, but people.
People, that's fabulous, unbelievably fabulous. So I think that certainly I want to connect with you in whatever way I can. Why don't you give us, David, give us a little bit of history. You say you did this somehow with David Hartsoe because he read your book. Now, I have to admit, I haven't read your book. So why don't you start off by telling us how you happened to write a book, what you had to say, and why we should all read it. And what's the name of it?
Well, I've written quite a lot of books, and they all have different names. And World Beyond War has produced a book called A Global Security System, an Alternative to War, that we update with input from smart people like you and our friends everywhere every year. So we're working on our 4th edition of that book. But the book that I wrote back in, I guess, late 2013 was called No More War, The Case for Abolition, or I'm sorry, War No More, The Case for Abolition. And it was sort of laying out concisely in a very short book, an argument for ending all war, ending the entire institution of war, not just opposing each particular war one after another and each weapon system one after another, but taking on the whole institution and figuring out the steps to get there. And a long time peace activist and justice activist named David Hartsoe, who lives in San Francisco, read that book and suggested to me starting up a new organization. And he actually is a guy who has started up quite a number of organizations and then gone about his business and left them to grow. And he helped me get together a group of volunteers and some initial funding and start something up. And we've been growing from there.
Mm. You say you've written other books before. Well, what were your other books? And what is your professional background? Why were you out there writing books all this time?
Well, I have a master's in philosophy, with which, you know, that and $1 will get you a bus ride. I don't know what else you do with it, but I was working as, you know, an activist on more domestic related issues, anti-poverty, housing, banking, and labor. And I found that I could find work with peace groups, and that was something that I saw as really fundamental. You know, I was working on domestic issues at the time of September 11th, and I saw everybody by universal consensus just take everything good and decent off the agenda and say, well, we can't have that now because now we must have wars. Well, that's not okay with me. I'm gonna end the wars. And so I you know, eventually figured out how I could get enough work working for peace groups before I started, you know, launching my own peace groups. And so I've been writing books mainly on the topic of ending war. So I wrote a book called War is a Lie. That's a guide to the types of lies we're told about wars when wars are launched and when they're continued and long after the fact. As sort of a kit to allow people to spot the lies more quickly, because we often have support for a war and then a year later have a strong majority saying, no, we shouldn't have had that war. So I wanted to kick in more quickly, as it's been doing, thankfully, in 2013 on Syria, in 2015 on Iran, now on Yemen. People are starting to get active. I wrote a book called When the World Outlawed War, about the peace movement around the world in the 1920s and the creation of the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which is a treaty that bans war that's still on the books and makes war illegal. I wrote a book called War is Never Just, which is a rejection of just war theory, looking at the criteria that just war theorists claim a war would have to meet to be just, and proving that no war can ever meet a single one of the criteria, and that even if one could, it couldn't outweigh all the damage of the institution of war and dumping all that funding. I mean, so this is sort of central to the educational mission of World Beyond War, is to say, look at the institution of war. It is the place where we dump all the money that's needed for everything good and just in the world, a fraction of which could, 3% could end starvation worldwide, 1% could end the lack of clean drinking water worldwide, a larger fraction could go after mitigating the damage of climate destruction. And war and militarism are a top source of climate destruction. a top source of the erosion of our rights and liberties, the justification for government secrecy, a top promoter of bigotry and racism, and all the violence that comes back with the veterans, and the militarization of local police, and this toxic influence on our whole culture that comes out of militarism. To deal with all of those problems, we need a broad coalition. We need the civil liberties groups to recognize that they're dealing with the symptoms. The illness is militarism.
Absolutely.
We need the environmental groups to be willing to go after one of the top destroyers of the environment. We need the immigrants' rights groups to start talking about refugees and what creates refugees, and so forth. Across every issue area, militarism ought to be central, and anti-militarism ought to be a partner with anti-racism and anti-extreme materialism, as Dr. King said in his famous speech. And so we're trying to, and with some success, we're trying to move the peace movement in the direction of confronting the entire institution and ceasing to say, we want to end a war so our great military can be better prepared for other wars that are better. Or we want to end a weapon system because it doesn't actually work. We want the weapon systems that kill better. We want to instead to talk and act down a path that leads to total abolition.
I love it. Absolutely. What a marvelous speech you just gave. Every word of it is music to my ear. Ears, all of my ears. Greta, now what about you? I bet you can't top what he just said.
And
give an account of yourself. How did you get into this business?
Well, I have a background in environmental community organizing, working on issues of water contamination and fracking, fossil fuel use, and GMO labeling. And so from that background, I was also sort of doing the hands-on work of being out there on the land and doing organic farming as well. And so I was looking for some way to find this balance between activism and then, you know, getting your hands in the soil and building the work from the ground up, literally, that we need. And so I found World Beyond War, which allowed me to do both of these jobs because I can work from my tiny home where I am today. I have an off-grid tiny home that's solar powered, and I can work here from the farm and do World Beyond War, which is an amazing opportunity to connect with people from all over the world, as David said. In one day I can email with and call and have conference calls with people from Pakistan and Afghanistan and Canada. Wow. So it's really amazing and allows me to mesh these two worlds. And really, I think what appealed to me about World Beyond War is similar to what David was just saying about how really, if we look at the institution of war, we see that it is this root cause of all of these other issues. And so it really connected well with my previous environmental organizing work when you start to peel back the layers and see that war is this top cause of climate chaos and a top contributor to, you know, air pollution, soil pollution, and water pollution.
That's marvelous. Absolutely wonderful. I am just thrilled. And now you're out there sending what, emails every day to all these 170 places in the world. What kinds of stuff are you sending? What kinds are you, how does it work? Are you kind of disseminating, well, what do you do? How do you spend your day?
Well, my job is the organizing director. And so my work is really engaging activists and volunteers and helping them move through the steps of activism. So that often involves organizing educational events in their community, like film screenings and bringing in guest lectures, all the way up to organizing full-scale campaigns in their community. So doing petitions and rallies and letter writing campaigns and meeting with their elected representatives to talk about these issues of the total abolition of war. And then within that, two of our primary campaigns are divesting from weapons manufacturers and military contractors. So pulling money out of war and weapons. And you can do that on an institutional level, such as divesting a university's endowments. And you can do that on a city level, such as divesting municipal public pension funds. And then another campaign that we're engaging with is closing military bases. And we're looking at all military bases around the world with particular focus on US military bases, which constitute 95% of all military bases around the world.
I hadn't heard that. That's interesting.
Yes, the US has 800 bases in 80 countries around the world.
Now, in these places all over the world, these 170 people or groups or whatever, are they mostly working with local issues? Do they organize projects of their own, campaigns of their own, or do they look to you for support with materials? And are you, to what extent are these projects knit together as a unified project or campaign? And to what extent are they local groups that just somehow affiliate to World Beyond War?
Yeah, it's certainly a combination of both, and the overarching umbrella is peace education and raising awareness about these issues that David was talking about in terms of this entire institution of war and the multifold impacts of it. So that is our foundation. And we provide a lot of educational materials that we disseminate to activists, including the book that David mentioned, The Alternative Global Security System, which we publish annually. And then accompanying the book, we have a study and discussion guide, which is available free on our website. We do our own webinar series, which is also available free on our website. We have PowerPoints and videos and full-length films. So we have this whole suite of educational resources that we provide to volunteers, and then we work with them if they want to go to the next level of actually establishing a chapter that meets regularly in their communities and then launches a campaign.
Would you say that when people attempt to do peace education, who's their main audience? Are people trying to reach especially young people in schools or in universities? Are they mostly trying to reach the middle America or middle institutions like churches and Rotary clubs and things like that? Who are the people being educated, if you will, about peace issues, especially in the U.S., but if there's a difference, if you see some differentiation in other countries, I'd like to know about that too.
David, do you want to take that one?
Sure. As you know, peace studies, which doesn't always mean anti-war studies, but peace studies is growing very, very rapidly in colleges and universities and high schools around the country, and more so around the world in many countries, much more rapidly than in the United States. I go and speak in college classes and high school classes, and most often to peace groups. And the public events that I have found the most useful in recent years have been debates where I debate someone who thinks the opposite of myself on the question of can war ever be justified? So I've done some debates with a gentleman who teaches what passes for ethics at the West Point Military Academy of the U.S. Army. And he'll argue for various wars having been justified or some theoretical future war being justifiable, and all argue the opposite, that you cannot possibly ever justify a war. And we'll poll the audience and the online audience before and after and see how many people moved. And, to the limited extent we're able to draw conclusions, they always move in the right direction. And even at peace events, I'll ask people at the beginning, raise your hand if you think war is never justified. Raise your hand if you think war is sometimes justified. If it's the general public or it's a high school class, every single hand is up for sometimes justified. If it's, a hardcore peace activist group, then, it's maybe even 2/3 will say never justified. But then they'll start to have doubts during the conversation. So in terms of speaking to groups like that, what I find most useful is the younger, the better. High school better than than university, because they haven't locked in as passionately to identifying themselves with the belief that war is justified and good and noble and glorious. They haven't formed opinions yet, and so providing them with some basic information, and 99% of it in the United States has to begin with World War II, which is everyone's go-to topic when they're trying to justify a war. Providing them with some basic actual history rather than mythology. What was World War II actually? Starts to turn people around in 20 minutes. And we pass around forms at the end of events and get people to check off, have you moved in the direction of wanting to end all war? And you always get, most of the people checking that.
Have you ever videotaped or video recorded any of those debates? I would love to see that conversation, and I'd love to see, of course, the reaction of the audience. But mostly, for years, I've wanted exactly to hear a discussion of that. It might be a written discussion. I hadn't thought about having it as an oral debate, but I have thought, I wish somebody would write a book saying, if we had decided not to have World War II, what could we have done instead? And make a case for it. And I've never seen such a book. If you have such a tape or a recording of yourself making that kind of argument, I'd love to see it.
The answer is yes, and you can look on World Beyond War's website, and perhaps most readily on my personal website, davidswanson.org, because I have a YouTube of one of those debates permanently there on the homepage, so that people can find it. Yes, it's a topic that I discuss all the time and try to get as many people as possible to become aware of and watch and read and listen to. And it's a topic I address at great length in a number of books and lots of articles.
Wow. Okay, I absolutely will follow that up because I really want to see it from my own curiosity. It's strange. There must be a hole in my own education. I have to say that when you talked about how peace education courses are growing in the U.S., I'm a little surprised. I created a peace and conflict program at the University of Toronto's Mississauga campus. There was one already that Science for Peace had instigated or been instrumental in starting on the main campus of the University of Toronto. And I started one in about 1984 or 5, something like that, and ran it for, I guess, 13 years. And then I retired and I kept teaching other courses that I didn't, I kept for another 4 or 5 years teaching a course for free on negotiation and nonviolence there because the students liked it so much, I just kept offering it. But when I retired, they ended the program at my campus. And I had the feeling then, which was now, it's been 20 years since I retired, but I had the feeling then that this was part of a trend that during the 80s, there'd been an upsurge in peace education courses at the university level in the US and in Canada. Not too many in Canada, but we did a few. And that peak had declined. Are you saying now that it's back in business, that it's booming again?
My impression is that the number of campuses and universities in the United States that offer peace studies or something called peace studies continues to grow pretty rapidly. Although I was a featured speaker at a conference, I guess, of the Peace and Justice Studies Association, which includes Canadian and United States professors. And they told me I was the first peace activist they had come and speak against war. And I met with a lot of the students, and they told me all the wonderful things they were studying, and they all had to do with gender relations and racial relations and all sorts of good things. I supported 100% of them, but not a one of them mentioned anything related to peace or war. So I don't know that peace studies always means anything related to anti-war studies. I think it often, as we were discussing earlier off the air about what the Nobel Peace Prize has become, I think often peace, as in peace and justice centers in towns in the United States, comes to be just a heading for all good liberal causes. So I can't actually tell you how many serious courses on the problem of war are being offered in the United States. I'm sure somebody could.
Well, I've been in it for, I was pretty active in that kind of thing when I was running a peace and conflict program. You mentioned the Peace and Justice Studies Association, which is the outcome of what was the peace studies, I believe, peace.
Yeah, they add justice
PSA.
to water down the peace.
Yeah, I know. But even that only lived about 3 or 4 years because it was the outcome of something called COPRED, Consortium on Peace Research, Education, and Development. And I was very active in that in the 80s. And that, I would say, at that time, the reason it kind of broke apart and PSA, is that right? Peace Studies Association, yes. That emerged because people teaching peace studies programs at university level felt that they needed a professional level association, which they could say was really a prestigious outfit. That is, they could ask for travel money to go to it or put it with on their CVs with pride and that sort of thing. Whereas, in fact, a portion of the COPRED movement consisted, it included a bunch of people who did a variety of other things like family counseling, to get rid of conflicts in the family, or local community organizing and, working with social justice movements of various kinds. That was included in COPRED. So PSA, I think, came out as a more professional organization. And I suppose it must have stayed that way because they did have a meeting at Wilfrid Laurier a couple of years ago, or maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. And I organized 2 panels there, but it was pretty small because there were mostly people coming, the Canadians more than Americans who came here. So I guess what I'm saying is that at that time, I thought that they were not able to keep the Peace Studies Association going. They had to go back into a broader kind of title and I think a more inclusive kind of thing, although I don't know for sure. And I think question of how much is being done in terms of university level instruction or colleges, I think that I'm not too sure whether that is booming the way it was in the early 80s. I'll have to look into that, but it's certainly very important. My own sense was when I was teaching, and I taught it 20 years, taught peace studies at the University of Toronto for 20 years. I think almost all the students came out of my class knowing more about the problems of war, and especially, of course, about things like nuclear weapons, because I tend to emphasize that. But and their values, I think, may have been moved, but they did not become peace activists. And I have not found very many young people at all who have become, committed to peace work while they're still young. My sense is that they get some good ideas and then they go out and see the world and form a family and take on mortgages and get on the professional ladder and stuff. And then in middle age, they may become peace activists again. I'm just not too sure. Or better yet, when they retire, then they become really good peace activists. That's the best time to recruit them because they have more time and they know a thing or two too. So yeah, I don't feel that recruiting people to the peace movement as young people works all that well, but certainly you're educating them, and it has some influence.
I'm old enough to consider Greta to be a young person, and Greta is there in her off-grid house doing less damage than any human being on Earth and doing more good than most human beings on Earth, and recruiting more young people. That, you know, it can be done.
Tell me, Greta, are you reaching out primarily to young people, and do you have a special focus on contacting youth and organizing youth?
We reach out to people of all ages and all backgrounds, so I wouldn't say I'm particularly only focusing on them, but you know, that's one piece of our overall work. And we do, as I said, like peace education is the foundation of our work, and we have our book and study guide as well as online courses that we provide. Tony Jenkins is our education coordinator, so much of his work is engaging with college students. He's a professor as well as the education coordinator for World Beyond War, so he is incorporating this material right into the classroom, and David visited the classroom a couple weeks ago to do a talk for his students. I think going back to this discussion of how do you engage young people, which is a continuing question that I hear all the time. You know, I think obviously there is some truth to what you said about the fact that when people are retired, you know, they have more free time on their hands and more supplemental income or savings that they can use to donate to organizations and donate their time as volunteers. Obviously, there is truth to that, and I've seen that as an organizer. But at the same time, we do see many millennials and young people engaged on issues. You know, millennials are really leading Standing Rock, the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota in the United States. We've seen millennials leading the Occupy Wall Street movement several years ago, and the Bernie Sanders movement, if I might call it that, just last year. And so we do see millennials engaged, and I think that it really comes down to the messaging and the tactics that organizations are using. And that's why I think we have great potential with the anti-war movement and what we're doing here at World Beyond War, because we're really, like I said, bringing all of these issues together and talking about how if you're concerned about the 99% and the 1% and economic injustice and inequality that is increasingly growing, that war is a primary cause for that. Mm-hmm. Number one, by diverting trillions of dollars a year to war instead of to other issues such as job creation and renewable energy and all these other important issues. Mm-hmm. And so that's the primary way that it's diverting our resources. And so if we can make those interconnections, I think we can bring in activists, young activists, and activists of all ages that are already engaged.
Beautiful. Well, I certainly think that in my experience anyway, and it's, you know, I don't have that much contact with young people since I don't teach anymore, although I did teach until a year or so ago. I kept teaching a little. But I'm not sure. It seems to me that the young people are more easily mobilized for work on climate change, and that the connections that need to be made between climate change and militarism, that is probably the best linkage that can be made. You had one person, or at least one person here at your conference, who gave a talk about that particular issue. And I think that is really important. What we are doing, I'm running something called the Project Save the World. We had a conference at the end of May here in Toronto about where we were trying to come up with a platform for survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if they were all enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats. War and weapons, especially militarism and nuclear, being obviously number one. Global warming also very important, equally maybe, but famine and pandemics and major reactor exposure, or, you know, radiation exposure from something like a reactor blow up or something. And now cyber attacks, all of those are global issues that any one of them could wipe out 1 billion people in a very short order. And yet we see them all as interdependent. They all absolutely have some causal relationship with each other, such that you can't really solve any one of those problems without solving at least one of the others. So they're a package, a system. And I think that the most important part of the whole thing is militarism, because militarism is a major component of global warming, and it's not even recognized fully. You know, it was not in the Kyoto Accord, and it's not even been properly acknowledged in the Paris Agreement, that it's necessary to reduce, not just stop wars, but also stop the preparation of military equipment for wars. Every time you build a tank or run it around the block, you're going to emit a whole lot of CO2, and so on. A tank or a plane or a missile or even foot soldiers, they all are a source of global warming. And all of these other things are interdependent. So what we are doing is working on the intersection among them. And I hope we'll be able, in some months now, to have a meeting of some experts on each of these global threats to look at specifically the problem areas where they share the same threat. Each threat has some common problem, and we can look at common solutions to them as well. So I'm really pleased to see that your own definition of the challenges extends not only to include militarism as a generic thing, more than just warfare, but also preparations for war and rebuilding after a war and that kind of thing. You're including a lot of things that are absolutely key to this. And I love the fact that David says he's not just a U.S. organization. You want to be a world organization. And I think that is so key, that I if we could just get rid of some of these damn borders, we'd be better off. But that's a whole other conversation. Yeah.
We agree, of course, and we've set up our website, worldbeyondwar.org, as an argument for people for why and how to end war. And if you go to why at the top of the website and drop down, one of the reasons to click on is that war destroys the environment. And if you go there, you find the case argued, and books and articles and videos and films, and our whole conference, No War 2017, was on the theme of war and the environment. And we brought together environmental groups and peace groups and made this case. And yeah, we had a speaker or two on that topic in 2018 in Toronto, but we had the whole conference focused on that topic in 2017. And, it's not just that these big treaties fail to mention militarism, like this proposed new Green Deal in the United States fails to mention militarism, but they have waivers in there for militarism.
Absolutely, yeah. They exclude military as if, well, you certainly couldn't do without a war. You have to have your military. Oh, exactly. My goodness. Exactly. Well, we would lose our security without the military. Oh, dear.
Wars are the direct cause of the worst destructions of the environment and the worst famine currently, and the worst disease epidemics currently. But we have all this new activism. More of it is focused on the environment, but these new groups, the Sunshine Movement, the Extinction Rebellion, which is a name kind of similar to Save the World, they are eager to work against militarism. It's the big, well-established, well-funded environmental groups that won't touch militarism. Your local chapters of those big groups will. Your local friends will. So if we have a peace movement that has chapters everywhere, we can work locally with environmental groups, and we can build up to the national and global level from there. And these activists are ready to act like there is an urgent crisis, as there is, and to act like it on the nuclear threat, the doomsday clock that's closer to midnight than ever, as well as the climate destruction that's closer to to disaster than ever, and we even have now had Congress members in the United States Congress vote in favor of ending a war. This never happens.
Yeah, amazing.
And it's, it's happened only in the Senate, knowing that the House wouldn't do it, and it has a big loophole in the bill, and it doesn't deal with the weapons sales, and the president's promised to veto it, and there's all these drawbacks, but it's nonetheless huge to be able to build on the fact that we can get these Congress members to vote to end a war, because then we got to get them to vote to end the next one and the next one and the next one. And you have to give people these steps that they can build on. So there are things come January in the United States that we can work with. And we have some big events planned in the coming months around the world that we were talking about before we went on the air that we can fill people in on as well.
Yeah. Okay. I love this. And now one of the things that we have to always think about, it seems to me, is the argument about money. I mean, it was so obvious when Trump made the statement, defending the Saudis. Basically, the argument is it's okay to murder people as long as you buy your weapons from us, because we like money. And the odd thing is, it shocked a few people, but it wasn't really spoken of as, nobody in the mainstream TV seems to have directly said that's the most asinine kind of argument I ever heard. They didn't quite confront that directly, but the same argument has been put forward here in Canada, because you may know that Canadians have a multi-billion-dollar deal of selling armored personnel carriers to the Saudis. And this has been pending for 6 or 8 months, maybe a year, when we knew that this was a terrible thing that should have never been agreed to. But the Justin Trudeau government has not been willing to back down. Today's newspaper, the regular Globe and Mail today, said, yes, they are looking for ways to get out of this contract, but it's $15 billion worth of money that they are expected to, be put in jeopardy, this contract, if they don't fulfill the deal and produce these weapons for the Saudis to use against the Yemenis. And so that, but if you just put it that crudely, that yes, we are in the business of making money by killing people and by helping other people kill people, and we just like money, and not that we can't do without it, but we just want to do it. Yeah. That is so gross that somehow people at least feel disgusted once in a while. And I think, that's what we have to point out. Not only that, but then we have to say, well, what are we going to spend the money on? Yes, let's transfer and stop making these armored personnel carriers, which doesn't do the climate any good anyway, and start doing various other kinds of benign and useful contributions to ending climate disaster.
And it doesn't make most of us money. It makes a few stinking rich people more money that they don't need. And it actually has a negative impact on the global and the national economy to be focusing on militarism. Military spending actually eliminates jobs rather than producing them, compared to other types of spending. And these facts, people can be made aware of these facts, and they can move people. It was Senator Bernie Sanders, who Greta mentioned, had a big popular grassroots presidential campaign. During that campaign, he was arguing that Saudi Arabia needed to spend more money for more wars, as if wars were like a public service and the United States was being forced to pay for too many of them. Saudi Arabia needed to step up to the plate and pay its fair share for the.
Who was saying this?
Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders was making that argument?
Yes, so the Saudi Arabia, they've got so much money. They've got a huge military budget. They need to get in there and get their hands dirty. They need to pay for wars in Syria, not the United States. As if wars were a public good, that needed to be paid for by somebody, and it's better to have the Saudis do it. He has come 180 degrees. He has been now in recent weeks the leading figure in the US Congress, arguing that no more weapons should be sold or given to Saudi Arabia, and the United States military should end participation in this war on Yemen with Saudi Arabia.
Well, thank God. I mean, what you told me, it is so astounding. I'm totally flabbergasted. I didn't know he was making that argument earlier. When was he saying that? These bad things about wanting Saudis to get their hands dirty and spend more on weapons.
During his presidential campaign, when many of us were saying, you have such great ideas on domestic issues, if you would oppose militarism, we could get peace groups and peace activists to rally around you. And of course, you know, some would anyway, because look at the alternatives. Every other candidate was, you know, worse. But I don't know if Greta wanted to comment on this, but I wanted to mention before we run out of time that we do have some big events planned in the coming months that people might want to take part in.
I absolutely want you to. We have another 15 minutes, so go for it. Greta, if you want to talk about it too. Fine.
Sure. One of the big events coming up is on April 4th in Washington, D.C. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is coming to Washington, D.C. to celebrate its 70th anniversary. And we see that NATO is, in fact, the biggest military alliance in the world, is, in fact, violating international law, bombing countries, ignoring the UN, and at the same time saying that it's preserving peace. So we're trying to draw attention to the fact that NATO is in fact this horrendous perpetuator of war and militarism and violence. And so we're organizing a No to NATO, Yes to Peace festival on April 3rd in Washington, D.C. And you can go to worldbeyondwar.org to find out the details of that, which are still coming together as we're 4 months out and we're still trying to figure out what NATO's plans are and where they'll be meeting. Those details haven't been announced yet to the public, but we're planning this.
They have been in Peace Magazine, which I haven't seen it yet, but the January issue has been printed and I'll get my copies in the morning. And I did put a notice in the Newsworthy page about this upcoming event in Washington.
Thank
you.
I
also warned them that they better hurry up and get their hotel reservations because I understand it's during the cherry blossom time and everybody will be filling up the hotels at $200 a pop.
Yes, World Beyond War has already reserved 50 bed spaces actually at a church space. So people can go to our website, as I said, worldbeyondwar.org, and book a mattress for the night. So April 3rd in the evening, we'll have a big peace festival. We'll have nonviolence protest training, art making, keynote speeches, music, and food. And we'll be preparing and networking and educating ourselves. And then April 4th will be the big nonviolent demonstration outside of the NATO meeting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, David, you must have other things. You say there are plural things coming up. What else is on your mind?
There are lots, and you can always go to worldbeyondwar.org and click on events and see the map of the world and add an event or find an event. But we have been having this annual conference in September, the past 3 Septembers and the last one in Toronto. And we're looking now at next September having it in Ireland, where we just recently had a big meeting with people from all over the world on closing military bases, which is another, divesting local money from the military is a campaign that's doing a lot of good. But then closing bases is a campaign that having these chapters everywhere allows people to help each other, people in the United States in particular, to help people in countries that have the bases. So Ireland is supposed to be neutral, but has airports that it lets the US military use. Mm-hmm. We're going to bring people from around the world to a university in Limerick, Ireland, and protest at Shannon Airport. And so we're looking at actually possibly October 3rd to 5th, a week later than usual in Ireland. And we're hoping to have the next big event we do be in Ottawa, Canada, the next spring, that is May of 2020, to oppose this big weapons bazaar that they have and replace it with a peace celebration and a peace festival and a peace art bazaar. And if possible, get it displaced, get it canceled, at least get it balanced by an alternative point of view, and energize people in Canada and elsewhere with that event in Ottawa. So some of these are a little far out and a little tentative, but it's good to get them on our calendars.
Well, keep me posted, because we do have Peace Magazine, and we have our website, and we have the Project Save the World too, which is, I should tell you other people where that is. It's tosavetheworld.ca. So you can look there at the platform for survival. And we have bibliographies, and we'll be putting this up. We have all our videos from the series like this. And what we're working on now, David, is a wiki. We're going to have one essay for each of the platform proposals, our 25 platform proposals, and then some additional platforms that we should have put on the list but didn't. And so we'll have a wiki that I'll announce later when it's really up and running. But people then can go and see why it'd be valuable to endorse this platform for survival, and try to get people in other countries to do likewise. If you can get 170 countries involved, I should be able to get 30 or 40, don't you think?
Absolutely. And you can send us news on what you're doing that we can share with everybody in World Beyond War.
We will indeed share. And indeed, I interviewed Kevin Zeiss a few weeks ago, and we will be sending stuff to his outfit too. What's it called? Popular Resistance? Is that what it's called?
That's the one.
Yeah. It's great to form friendships with my homeland as a dual U.S.-Canada citizen. Sometimes I've lived in Canada now longer than the U.S., and it's kind of good to form alliances with the people that nurtured me and made me into a peacenik.
You're promoting actually something called a world passport that allows you to identify yourself as a world citizen and to think of yourself as a world citizen. And you can actually get one of these from a link at worldbeyondwar.org. But whether you do or not, it's helpful that we all think of ourselves that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. What was his name? This wonderful man who started that?
Gary Davis.
Gary Davis. Yes, bless his wonderful heart. He actually gave up was it U.S. citizenship that he gave up?
Yes.
So that he could claim he could only be a world citizen. And apparently some countries would actually let him in and say, okay, if you're a world citizen. I would love that. I think I need to join the world.
You should.
Yeah. Okay. So what else do we need to talk to? We have another 7 or 8 minutes, and I don't know where I want to go from here with this, because I certainly feel one way or another we have to form much more cooperation, and I'll certainly disseminate your material on ours, and maybe we can put this video on yours or something like it if you want to share it. Yeah.
Well, the United States, is looking to Canada to stop participation in some of its wars and stop some weapons sales. A number of countries have now stopped weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. Canada ought to be next. One would expect it to come through before the United States, not to bring up the rear. And we need people in Canada to take on NATO as well. This April 4th is the day that Dr. Martin Luther King made the greatest speech he ever made against war. And exactly 1 year later, on April 4th, they killed him. And here comes NATO wanting to celebrate itself and its militarism and its bases and its weapons on April 4th in Washington, D.C. There should be events all over the world protesting this, at least in NATO countries. And people can come to Washington, D.C. if they can make it. But at least protest NATO where you are, because when Canadians see that something's happening through NATO and they think, oh, then it's legitimate. It's not just the U.S. They've got it wrong. NATO is a U.S. tool, and when people in the U.S. see NATO, they think it's a legal international body that makes war legal and acceptable. So it's an organization whose purpose is primarily propaganda, is whitewashing a crime, and we need everybody to face up to what NATO is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the most interesting and I don't know what to call it, but a debate going on here within the peace movement in Canada has to do with what Canada's position should be vis-a-vis NATO. The current issue of Peace Magazine, which, as I say, I will be receive my first copy in a few hours, does have an article arguing Canada should quit NATO. But I would say half or more of other peace organizations take the position that Canada is a member of NATO and has a vote, and that our top priority should be for NATO to renounce its nuclear policies, especially removing the tactical nuclear weapons from Europe, and all of the other ways in which NATO has a definitely first use capacity and intention, declaration of intention. They will not promise no first use. They will not abolish anything, but that Canada should be the first country to bring this up within NATO and say, we will not tolerate this anymore. We have to stop it. So as a member, you can argue it either way, David, and I honestly do not have a position. Yeah. I can see, certainly when the Warsaw Treaty Organization was abolished, I was totally in favor of abolishing NATO as a reciprocal action, that made perfect sense at that time. But as of right now, how to do the most good to abolish the nuclear policies of NATO, I would flip a coin to decide whether I would say that Canada should withdraw or not, because I think that if we want, and part of the discussion has to do with whether or not Canada can sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the new ban treaty. And most Canadian activists that I know say that Canada can sign it now legally as a member of NATO, and then demand that NATO change its policies and go along with the ban. But that as of now, probably Canada could not ratify the treaty unless it did leave NATO. Tricky argument, and I may not have described it right, but I think that's probably the prevailing opinion.
I think you've described another good reason to get out of NATO. It's, you're staying within a criminal operation, voting for it to obey the law. You're voting for a butcher not to carve any meat. I mean, this is not how you abolish war. If Canada wants to make those proposals within NATO with the understanding that when they're rejected, Canada will leave, that'd be fine with me, because Canada will end up leaving, and that will do, I think, the most good. There's not a good use for NATO that NATO can be reformed to. It's a criminal operation that needs to cease committing crimes.
Well, I can absolutely see that argument, and I don't disagree. I mean, I certainly see it, and it might be, some would say that with a little push, some other countries in NATO could also follow suit. That it's just a question of some countries don't want to be the first one to go. And Canada, unfortunately, is not likely to be the first one to go. I have to admit that. So you may be right that the best thing to do is just say, well, we're out. And certainly that's a simpler argument, no doubt about it. Yeah. I see that we have just about finished our time, and I have just enjoyed. Anybody have another concluding remark you'd like to toss into this? Because I hate to let go of you. It's so nice to make new friends and be in touch with you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say stay tuned for our webinar coming up in January. The date is still to be announced, but we're teaming up with Canadian Voice of Women for Peace to host a webinar on this topic exactly of why we need to abolish NATO.
Good. All right. I wish I'd known that a little earlier. I could have put it in the magazine, but it's now too late for January. But we will put it on, we can do it on our website. We can also announce it on tosavetheworld.ca. And so this has been great fun. And please let's stay in touch. And please let's share and be acquainted with what everybody else is doing. I don't travel so well anymore, so I'm probably not going to go to your April event in Washington, although it sounds absolutely glorious. And I hope you have fun. I'm sure you will. And it's great. We're all saving the world. And it looks like sometimes it looks like there's a little hope. So I wish you a happy new year coming up.
Thank you so much, Metta.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.